Okay, this is a Patreon only video. I mentioned to you guys I was going to do this last fall, but the stores that used to do kraut season sales in my area stopped last year for some reason, so I got to do this time of year. So in springtime, the time when you're going to have cabbage on sale for the best prices is going to be around St. Patrick's Day. When St. Patrick's Day came around, I bought 80 some pounds worth of cabbage. And now I finally have the time and the help to process it all. This is not a one-person job. It goes a hell of a lot faster if you have one or two other people. You can do it by yourself. It just takes a hell of a lot longer. So I had the combat cameraman who agreed to come over and help out during this. He's going to do the pictures while I show you the steps as we make sauerkraut. Now, first basic step, we got our raw heads here. They can be from your garden, from your store. They should look nice. There's a lot of loose leaves on them if you can't tell. I'm used to tighter heads. It's just the way they were this year. Way it's going to go. So grab yourself a head here. We have the other box that we're using for our scrap leaves and stuff. Go through, you strip off any loose leaves and any that are really messed up. See, there's some little stuff on this one. I'm going to go through. First try peeling off the leaf it's on. There's still little bits in here. I will cut that out. Now, this is how we have it set up. After I get the leaves peeled off here, they go to over here. We have a bench, a towel set up on it. The person that's stripping them puts them over here once they're stripped, ready to go. So then the next person who's going to do the cleaning and cutting comes over when they're ready. Grab a head of cabbage, take it over to the sink for washing. Give it a good rinse off, wipe off. And then shake out as much water from it as you can. Move over to the cutting board, or cutting station. Cutting station. First thing that's done, cut this little piece off the center here, set it over to the side. Then we're going to go through, I'm going to just do a little cut and tear to get some of these messed up parts of the leaves off. Because we're trying to save as much of the head as we can for processing. Now, obviously you get rid of any wilted leaves, any dried off leaves, cut out any messed up sections where it looks like something poked through, chewed on it, that type of thing. Now, go through, have a nice long knife for this, that's what we found works the best. Slice it in half. One half over there, one half over here. Set it so that the core facing away from you. Cut it in half, basically slicing the core in half. Set that to the side. Now we got the core right here, if you can see it, this big thick part down at the bottom. Take your knife, go in behind it, slice down, cut the core out, set it to the side. See? Now we take it again, cut that in half again, you go through for the rest of the cabbage head. Then what we do, we take the little eighths of a head here, move it over to this next part of the station for processing. We put it on a big plate or a platter so that the person that's processing can just grab, load, and process. So we have food processor here. I do not have a kraut cutter. It is on my list of things to get, so we got to use a food processor. Open it up. Usually we can fit 2 of these 8s in here. You set them in as best you can. Close it, latch it, put the little feeder in it. There is a little process position on this button here. So now we're going to process it. Okay, camera guy, back up a little. Take the push piece out. I'm going to show you on the next stage here. And I'll show you on the blade here quick. These blades usually are set up so you have a slicer blade on one side and kind of grater on the other. You want the slicer facing up. That's what's going to be slicing through your heads, giving you your strings of cabbage for the kraut. So now we're going to take this over to the weighing station. Now the recipe is 5 pounds of cabbage, 3 tablespoons of salt. I will do a link in the description. I will also put the link in the description on Patreon to the site at the University of Georgia that we get this recipe from. This is the best recipe we've ever come across for cabbage. It's the one I recommend the most for people doing sauerkraut. Now we look on the side here. This is just a cheap ass scale. We measure out, because the limitations on the scale, to 2.5 pounds per dish. So I fill this plastic dish with 2.5 pounds. I then transfer the first 2.5 pounds to a big metal dish. Then I put the plastic dish back on the scale, make sure it's zeroed out, and then I start refilling it. So now if you focus on the gauge over here, we're going to go to 2.5 pounds. You just feed it into the dish a little at a time. Spread it around. Sometimes you'll get bigger pieces come through it. You got to break up a little by hand. Like these. Sometimes you got to break these up. Get up to 2.5 pounds. If you got a better scale, better containers, more power to you. Do 5 pounds at a batch. But this one, we do 2.5 pounds. You are going to end up with a bit of a mess when you're doing this. It happens each year. Okay, I got about 2.5 pounds. So now we're going to move on to the next station. So now I'm going to take one of the bowls of cabbage. Two and a half pounds worth. We're using an 8-gallon crock on this batch. Pour all 2.5 pounds in. I'm going to set the bowl to the side for a second. Now, feed this around as best you can. Then you have to pound it. You have to pack it. I use a meat mallet here. Just try not to crack your crock while you're doing this. Pound the living hell out of the cabbage. What you're doing, you're breaking up the fibers in it. You're getting it to release the juice. This will soften the cabbage up. It'll process a lot quicker. You're also packing as much into the crock as possible. Now, I told you it is 3 tablespoons of salt for 5 pounds of cabbage. We added 2.5 pounds worth in here, so we're going to be putting in 1.5 tablespoons. This is the type of salt you use, canning pickling salt, otherwise non-iodized. Do not use iodized salt. It will mess up the fermentation process. So I'm using a 1/2 tablespoon here. try to get yourself an even amount across there, and then just sprinkle it around. Ooh, I got a big chunk of salt inside the box here and it's interfering. Okay, so this is my third half tablespoon for 1.5 tablespoons of salt. Watch how much salt you put in. If you put too much in, it will interfere with the fermentation process. If you do not put enough salt in, if you put in too little, you're going to end up with a bad mix of bacteria in here, which instead of having fermented cabbage, you're going to have rotten cabbage. So remember, 3 tablespoons of non-iodized salt, preferably pickling and canning salt, per 5 pounds of shredded cabbage. Now after I got this set, I go back, I get the next bowl of 2.5 pounds, bring it over, put it in here, I pound it, put on the next 1.5 tablespoons of salt, and then I just keep going on and on until this is full. How high do you go? You're supposed to go with it about 4 inches at the top of the crock. The reason being, it will rise in the beginning. It will puff up a lot. So we get in here, we fill it up to, you know, about 3-4 inches or so. We put a plate on top, facing down, and then we put a weight over the top of that. Our weight is typically a 1 quart mason jar full of water with a lid on it screwed on, and then we cover the whole thing with sheet plastic. I found that turkey bags work real good for this. Put that over the top, then I take some 550 cord, go all the way around, tie it off tight. This traps the air inside here, doesn't allow stuff to get in that doesn't need to be in there. It will contain the stuff a little bit. As I said, the first week or to 2 weeks, the cabbage is going to puff up. You're going to see this thing rise a good ways before it starts collapsing back down. After it collapses down, it sinks back down into where it was before. That's when I start checking it. I check it every week, approximately at that point. When that happens, I go through, I take my plastic off, set it to the side, make sure the outside's facing down onto wherever I'm setting it. So the other side that was facing inward is still semi-sanitary. I take my weight off, lift my plate up, set it to the side, and then I check the inside. I check the cabbage. If I find any that looks moldy and that stuff, I'll take it out at that time and I'll toss it. Oh, something I forgot to mention. Before you seal this up, you want to make sure there is enough brine in here, enough salted water. In the recipe, it does tell you how to make more brine, so have a pot of that ready on your stove at the end for putting inside on top of your cabbage. You want about 2 inches or so of brine over the top of the cabbage before you put the plate and the weight on top. And then over time, you either can add more brine or take off, you know, the very top layers of the cabbage to get it down below the top of the brine. How long does this take to ferment? According to the University of Georgia, anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. My stuff usually goes about 8 to 10. First, I go by the smell. Does it have the right smell to me, telling me that it's ready? Does it smell like sauerkraut? Is it strong enough? Once we get close to the right smell, that's when I'm going to do a taste test. When I do a taste test, I take a fork, I clean off a bit of the top, grab some from down inside, grab a piece and I taste it. See how it tastes. Does it taste like sauerkraut, or does it still taste like salty cabbage, or does it taste rotten? If it tastes rotten, well, you must not have added enough salt. If it still tastes like salted cabbage after, 5 weeks, you had too much salt in here and your fermentation is going to take a lot longer than what it should. But most of my stuff usually goes to around the 8-week mark. Once it's to the right taste, I cover it back up in that stuff. Then I go through and I clean up the canning jars. I put this typically inside wide mouth quart jars because it's easier to get out, easier to pack and that stuff. Go through, can it up, mark the jars, put them on the shelf, and they're good to go. They will ferment a little bit more inside the jars on the shelf, but not a hell of a lot. Most of the fermentation is going to be done in here. A note, when you will see the brine in here go from clear to a little bit of a whitish color. It does not get super milky. And then ultimately it turns brownish. Once it turns brownish, that kind of tells me, hey, we're getting close, it's ready. Or it's really close to being ready for processing. One big issue for people that have tried this and quit after their first batch. If air gets inside, because you don't have a good seal on it, it used to be you would put a big ceramic or stone or wood cover on here. Well, air can get inside. You'll get mold growth on top of the brine. Don't worry about that. That's referred to as the mother. That's just part of the action that's going inside in the fermentation. Just scoop that off and toss it in your garden. Okay, add it to your compost pile. Doesn't matter. So if it gets moldy on top, just scrape off any moldy stuff, toss it in your compost. The stuff underneath that mold will be just fine. Don't worry about that. It doesn't mean your batch has gone bad. I've talked to a lot of people over the years that have tried to make sauerkraut, and they thought they screwed up so bad because mold started on it that they tossed the whole thing. No, it was doing what it was supposed to. It's just that air was able to get in, allowing that mold to grow. By putting the plastic over the top and sealing it with the 550 cord, I found that it cuts down on the air getting inside, so I have very, very minimal mold growth inside here. And the kraut that I get it's really damn good. I've been told by old Germans, people that were like 80, 90 some years old, that the way I've done the sauerkraut is the best they've tasted in their entire lives, to include when they grew up in Germany. So go through, read the recipe at the University of Georgia. It's easy as hell to do. It will last a long time. And if you're looking for some type of award-winning recipe for a county fair or something, hey, this is it. So thank you for being patrons, and this video is just for you guys. God be with you in the coming weeks ahead.